I'm going to start ththings off with the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act. And I know, Greg, now this is a little bit different for you, but I understand that you spoke at a press conference last week, and it's important to show that unions have solidarity. If one union is having some problems, well, that's what unions do, try to help our brothers and sisters out. So talk to me about this, because a lot of postal workers and transportation workers are facing all kind of attacks and assaults. So talk to me about this press conference last week. Let's start there.
Yeah, it's actually really sad. A lot of postal workers, a lot of letter carriers are being assaulted for their universal keys to try to, by people who want to go break open those blue mailboxes all across the world, across the country. And for us, I mean, it's really, it's not a big stretch. I mean, obviously the letter carriers are an affiliate of ours, but this is a problem we're facing in every single forward-facing worker union in this country. I mean, you have whether it be flight attendants, whether it be pilots, transit workers. It's a major problem. Ferry workers. It's Amtrak workers. There's the threat of assault, of physical violence, is something that's consistent across every single worker we are lucky enough to represent. And unfortunately, while the solutions are oftentimes going to be a little bit different, I think the common thread is that we need federal action, and that's the common thing.
So, is there any legislation that would kind of rein this in right now?
Yeah, actually, the legislation that I spoke about, for the press conference, was just introduced last week. It's got bipartisan support, and it would do a lot of interesting things, actually. One is increase the penalties to make sure that people are prosecuted, but also it would change that key, the universal key that is apparently the most seductive thing for people who are trying to commit these assaults. So it's really Brian Fitzpatrick, who is a congressperson, a Republican from Pennsylvania. He's a former FBI agent. He's one of the lead sponsors of this, and he describes it. And when he talks about what the bill does, it's incredibly compelling.
I understand one of the problems is a lot of these assaults are classified as misdemeanors. Would this legislation that you're talking about turn that into a felony, to your knowledge?
I don't know about whether it's a misdemeanor versus felony. I do know that it is a federal crime to assault a letter carrier. This one would require full prosecution about people, making sure that there are the full sentences assessed on people who commit crimes against letter carriers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Greg, I know one of the problems here, I don't think the punishment is strong enough, and hopefully this legislation will move the needle in the right direction on that. But as far as you mentioned this Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican, it sounds like it's got bipartisan support. Is that what I'm hearing right now?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Good. Well, we'll see what happens here. This is the Protect Our Letters Carriers Act, and I know there were a lot of people at that press conference last week, and I see Fred Redmond was one of them, who's the Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. We'll touch on that with him when we join with him in April. Let's move on to the REEF Act here. Why don't you explain what's going on? This is involving rail workers and unemployment and sickness benefits. There seems to be a problem here because it was cut, and this would restore it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like only in Washington type of story, basically. That I don't know if you recall way back in the day when sequestration was the big thing. Mm-hmm. They had mandatory cuts across the board, and it was meant to be the thing that was such a terrible consequence that it would force Congress to make a budget deal. Well, Congress let it happen, and they cut funding across the board in every federal agency and every federal program. And then they finally reached a budget deal after a little while, and sequestration went away, except they did not remove sequestration for railroad retirement railroad disability and unemployment insurance. So this is the only program that is still subject to this stupid idea, like the cliff that was self-created. And it's this one aspect of a program that is funded by workers and their employers. It has no taxpayer dollars that go to it at all. And it's just a stupid quirk that is making people suffer. And the people who have earned these benefits.
Once again, no cost to taxpayers, and there's a problem. Unbelievable, but we're talking to Washington here. All right, Greg, let's move on to Norfolk Southern shareholders. Apparently, you wrote a letter, and I read part of it on the show, about this hostile takeover. It's not done yet, but this company called, it's a hedge fund called Ancora Holdings, and they want to knock out the CEO. Talk to me about this. This is interesting because when Wall Street gets involved, there's all kind of problems. So explain this to me.
Yeah. So look, I mean, if you would ask me a year ago if I'd be writing a letter in support of a Class 1 railroad CEO, I would have told you were nuts. So just to tell you how much of a threat or how dangerous I think this is, should say something. The fact that I wrote a letter, a 3-page letter, supporting Alan Shaw at Norfolk Southern, and then the direction that he's taking the railroad. Frankly, you look at the track record of a company like this. I mean, they did the same type of thing at Bed Bath & Beyond, for example, and ousted the CEO, and then all of a sudden, they got out. They got their money, got out, and Bed Bath & Beyond no longer exists. It was a very, they changed the entire business strategy, cut down on how they operated and what their strategy was. And at the end of the day, it's just they're not in it for long-term growth. They're in it for themselves. They're short-term gains. And I think this is a really, really, it would be like a tripling down on the precision scheduled railroading business practice that has already been a major problem in the industry. And I think that it's time for us to stand up to the Wall Street mindset in the railroads and actually try to put railroading first and the country first and the workers first.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of this has to do with the fact that that train derailment in East Palestine cost over $1 billion. The shareholders don't like spending that kind of money, so they figured let's just dump the CEO. But the problem is, what kind of CEO are they going to put in there? All right, you got to read this letter, those of you listening right now. It's posted on the TTD website, ttd.org. Rail labor opposes Ancora's proposed ouster of Norfolk Southern CEO. Interesting story. Like you said, it's not too often you support a CEO, but in this case, you got to do it. You got to do it. Okay, my brother, you take care. We'll talk to you next month, okay?
All right, thanks, Flash.